Jim Hoffman.
Don't get it too hot yet. I'm going to talk for a minute. For those that like the numbers, this handle, the stock, I started out with 32 inches long. This is 3/8 round, 32 inches long. Somebody asked me about shovels, shovel blades. This is not a period piece in any way, shape, or form. The first mentor that I worked with is the one that showed me this handle style. You see this, I'm sure you see variations on this, even in this shop. It's not a period piece. The period shovels, fireplace shovels that I've seen, variations in sizes, even what look like miniature shovels. I think it's the French ironwork book that Dover reprinted. The guy that collected in the 19th century and is in a cathedral in France. Can't remember the name of that one. Has a whole page or two of these small shovels they think were apothecary shovels or something like that. And they're the same basic shape. Most of the period stuff, when you're talking even mid-19th century and earlier, more often than not, for a fireplace shovel or an object like that, it's made out of a heavy bar that's necked down and forge welded to the handle. Those guys were doing tons of forge welding because it was easier and faster than drilling a hole and making a rivet. And they could just work it that way. So when I don't know if I had any fireplace shovels up. There's very little difference in a fireplace shovel and a peel in the operation and making of it for me, other than the blade shape and whether it gets cupped into the shovel blade or not. And some places, I know the forges at Williamsburg, sometimes they're just using what looks like a peel. They call it a slice. So not all shovels are bent up on the sides. But for the period stuff, most of the time it's a forge welded bar that's spread out. Tons of forge welding going on in the early stuff. It is a little bit harder to weld mild steel, but get used to it. You know, yeah. And not all wrought iron is created equally. You know, I used to search for it. I hung on to a wagon wheel rims, moved them a couple of times, saving them for special projects. A few summers ago, I finally got to the point of cutting up one of the rims, and it just came apart on me when I started trying to work it. It wasn't very good iron, and I hauled it around all these years, and I ended up scrapping it. A gunsmith friend that works with iron, makes iron barrels, had said that one of the other theories he has that I believe on the old wagon rims that you have to watch is if it was not made with anything better than once refined iron that's very coarse, years of use is kind of impacting dirt and crap into the fibers, and that comes back to haunt you as well. So one other thing that I will say, couple things. I have lots of things to say, but how many of you have heard old timers just fuss and complain? You just don't make things the way they used to. How many of you have found out sometimes there's a very good reason why they don't make things the way they used to? Some people like nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. And the other thing, I do warn people that approach me, if they want something as close to authentic as I can possibly get it with the materials, etc., whatever it is you make, whether it be clothing or ironwork or stuff, you want it exactly the way you think they did it. You're also going to experience the same problems they had. Shovel blades, shovels and spades, you saw a brief picture of. I'm making them out of really good modern steel. Most of those were made out of wrought iron. The shovels, most of the time, didn't have any steel in them, on them, or any way, shape, or form, because they weren't meant for scooping loose dirt. A lot of the spades did have steel welded down on the bottom, but the body and the socket's still wrought iron. And if you use it the way modern people do, frequently you end up breaking the socket off. I had the good fortune of getting into Fort Ticonderoga's collection a few years ago. They have one of the best collections of spades, shovels, and picks in North America, especially site-specific stuff. They have a wonderful collection. And they have broken sockets. They have shovels and spades without sockets. You know, so they were breaking them in the period too. The curator at the time had spent some time in a blacksmith shop, and it was wonderful because he was able to point details to me. One of the picks, for example, was a French pattern pick. He had a very low opinion of French-made items from the period. He said they were really cheap, and I got a picture of it, and it showed up in the picture. The steel on the end of the pick was really like your thumbnail. That's all the steel they put on the end of that thing. So
So they were the Chinese of the net?
I didn't want to say that, but, you know, they were only dropped once, so it was a good sale. I'm going to do a quick handle before I set up and do the frying pan. So the handle is going to be very similar to what we did for the fork. What I did for the fork, and I just hesitated because I'm like, oh, that's a nice long heat. I'm going to run a little bit of a bevel on the edge. While it's there. This is 3/16 by 3/4. I'm going to work it to about one of my critical measurements and then cut it off. I'm going to go about 8 inches long on this. The thing about frying pans are very difficult to document exactly what date and where. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. All right, you're going to have to bear with me. I can't let this one go. I can't grab it either. We could do that, but I want some length. I'm not purposely building a cave here. I'm trying to build up as much coke as I can because when I get to working the frying pan, I'm going to be working mostly on top of the fire. And I don't want coal sticking to it all over the place. That's better. That's more like it. That's what I was fussing over, that little curl. For the new folks, since that curl's nice and tiny, I'm making certain it's up in the fire, that it doesn't tip down. For the old guys, don't forget. I'm going to bevel down a little bit more, and then I'll cut it off and get it ready to attach to the pan. All right, if you have this style of anvil at home, I'm going to do something I don't like to do, is turn my back on you. The reason why is I don't want to work that bevel here. If I miss the spot, I either hit the anvil, I'm either going to ding the anvil or my hammer. So if you have a step, work close to the step. And in this case, that just makes it come down easier, quicker, and you don't worry about dinging up your anvil. I could have worked here too, but this radius is different than this radius, and that will affect it. I'm just roughly estimating the length of this handle. There are some old frying pans that have really, really long handles. A lot of modern people don't understand that you got to support the handle. They want a pan to sit there by themselves, so you have to watch how long you make your handle for the size of pan that you make, if you decide to make them. I hope this one's not too long for the size pan I'm going to make. Speak up, I can't hear you.
If your customer wants a longer handle, do you beef up the thickness of your frying pan?
You can, but when you beef up the thickness of the frying pan, it means more oomph from you. There's a big, huh?
You need to beef up the price.
Well, yeah, you need to beef up the price too, but I used to make smaller pans this size out of 16 gauge, and it's unforgiving. You have to be much more exact, and you get more warpage factor that you fight. And I found the 14 gauge comes out nicer, but it meant I had to put more muscle into the project. I noticed a significant difference of going from 16 gauge to 14 gauge. Stop for a second, James. I'm going to do a shoulder and a spread. I haven't had a lot of projects in this course of this demo that I'm going to use my cross peen to help spread it. This is another reason why this is my primary hammer. I'm going to switch over to the cross peen to spread it out faster. This is what I picked up from Peter Ross, and my cross peens are relatively flat in comparison. They're not rounded. If you have a really big radius here for doing this kind of work, it has a tendency to act more like a cutting tool opposed to a spreading tool. You want your corners to be radiused, because those can bite in if you're not careful as well, but this is relatively flat. I'm going to do it like I've done other projects, half on and half off, spread it out, and then bend it, rough it in for the frying pan. I'm lowering my left hand a little bit so I can feel that corner. Now I'm using the corner of my hammer to get it to move exactly where I want it to move. I'm going to take out some of those hammer marks, smooth it up a little bit. This is one of those examples where I start using almost all the edges and corners on my hammer. That's roughed in. Once it cools off, I want to let this air cool. Once we get it down to where I'm comfortable with it, I'll pass it around. I'll cool it off. Now the work begins. I think this is 8 inches. It's about 8 inches. Yep. This will come out to be about, it depends on how high I make the walls go. It'll be about a 7-inch pan. And this is where we use this. So if you can find old cylinders, oxygen cylinders, the bottoms are very thick. I was worried about that initially. That won't bother me too much. But the bottoms are very thick, and you can really do a lot of work in these. If they're rusty, don't worry about it. As long as you have a mini grinder, you can attack it pretty hard with a mini grinder. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the nicer it is, the better. I want to get this out of my way. At home, when I get into making these, I actually rough them in under the power hammer. I had somebody give me some steel grinding balls, and I had a piece of big round stock that was under the size of the ball, welded it to this piece, roughed in a dovetail. It's not a perfect dovetail, but it doesn't have to be for what I'm doing with it, because I'm not doing any serious heavy forging with it. I'm just shaping the frying pans, and I actually hold it with 2 pairs of tongs and rough it in under power. It's so much more fun when something else does the heavy work for you. At home, I'm burning gas, so I normally don't have to remind myself to scrape stuff off it in this part of it. But I build a bigger fire intentionally to get some coke built up because I'm going to be working on top of this mostly. And what's green coal do to your metal? Sticks right to it and gets in the way. So I'm going to work, which you couldn't see in the chandelier as well. You'll see it more here. I'm going to work in a spiraling fashion all the way around the outside, go into the center, and then come back out again. This is where I wish I had my leather apron. This is some of the hottest work I do. This and shovels and spades. Well, it's not the heaviest work I do. The reason it's the hottest is I'm so close to that big disc and it's just radiating the heat up on me. This is one of the few jobs at home when I get into doing a batch of pans that I frequently wear gloves on both hands. I prefer to work without gloves as much as possible. That is part of what I can blame my carpal tunnel and tendonitis on, is over gripping tools that I can't feel and not having brains enough to figure that out. And for this size pan, I was actually looking for a pair of my tongs that didn't have the ring. There are times where the chain link or ring, whatever you want to call it, gets in the way and clamps on when you don't want it to.
That's where that long handle comes in on your hammer.
Yes.
Long hammer.
Long handle and a long face. Later on, if you take a look at this handle, you can see I've used this one on frying pans before, and I've dinged up the handle reaching inside. You can use a larger dish and just work around your hammer and bring it up tighter than what the dish is in your surface. I listen as well as feel what I'm doing. What I don't want to keep doing is pounding on this when it bottoms out. Do you hear the sound change when I bottom out? What I'm trying to do is basically shape it. I won't want to do a lot of forging on it because, as I said earlier, it's sheet metal, and I don't like the physics of sheet metal.
How far from the edge are you working? Are you working the range like 1 inch to 3 inches?
I'm not paying any attention to that right now. I'm just working on a bowl shape.
You're working on both
I'm working all the way around it, all the way in it. I'm working on a bowl shape. That's good where it is. I'm coming close to the edge right now and then down into the center. I don't know if you're able to get that on camera. All right, what I'm looking for is a consistent radius here. I'm not too concerned about getting it perfectly smooth right now. I'm more worried about the radius. I can see some bumps and divots. Was there a question or just throwing comments out? Okay, I can take that too. You see this, I didn't say anything, I figured you guys just figured out. I'm flicking the scale out because I don't want to drive that into the product and I want to see better. All right, this is a roughed-in bowl. If I wanted to turn this into a round bottom spider, I would keep working it and clean it up. But I'm going to turn this into a flat bottom. I'm not going to worry about the smoothness of this part right now. I'm going to concentrate about an inch from the edge. At this point, Dan, there's your question. I'm going to go once around to try to bring the side up a little bit higher. I try to get it pretty close. I don't fuss. If a client asks me for a certain size pan, I say I'll get it close. Because I don't want to spend my life just making frying pans. If I was going to do that, I would get big blocks of certain size round stock so that's what the inside of the bottom of the pan would be, and go to that. Most people are fine. I don't have a large enough clientele that wants hundreds of these, so I don't worry about it. There's times I've thought about going into high production of pans, but I don't want to go into high production of anything. I'm going to work it and kind of pull and roll my hand up to get that side to come up a little bit more aggressively. I'm going to work it up against the back side of the radius and try to draw an imaginary line on here so that I'm reaching in the same amount all the way around. As
Clients for your frying pans, are they mostly all reenactors, or do you get restaurants or other people?
mostly museums and reenactors are the primary clients for these. Most restaurants and cooks like that want stainless steel. And I'm not going there. Have any of you worked stainless steel? You know why I'm not going there, right? It's pretty tough stuff. I actually had a client, an industrial customer, ask and provided stainless steel to make a set of tongs because they're pulling objects off of magnets. That was enough stainless steel experience for me.
But the bad part about it is if you're back here and you do like this,
You
can get
pinch.
pinched.
I would just flatten that out.
I would too, but Francis wanted it that way. But it's mine, I put it right around.
I would get rid of that, yeah.
Yeah.
Test, check, sound check. Howdy, howdy, friends and neighbors. All right. Here's another trick I do for tightening them up. Throw something in there. Give it a smack. Good. Is it okay to throw them in the water?
Yeah.
We're back. Yeah.
Business-oriented question. In your shop, if you need, say, a pair of tongs or something simple, do you make those? Do you purchase them?
I make them. I make my own tongs. Do we not have a camera over here today? Okay. All right. At home, I have a large swedge block, and I have it on a stand up higher. I like to try to keep most of my tools up about the same height as my anvil, especially if I'm working a long piece and I need it to lay on something. Can you see the wrinkles that I'm working in and out? I have to pay attention to how far, how fast I'm pushing it, how hard, and how hot or cold. I have blown the bottom of a pan, I've cracked them, I've poked holes in them. So those are all things I have to pay attention to. Experience tells me how aggressive and how soft I can be. Once I start getting this corner established, I can move it around a little bit, but it's difficult to bring the sides up more sharply if I want to change the sides. I can do that a little bit, but it depends on how sharp the corner starts to emerge. And what I'm doing is just watching the radius and gauging where I'm going, where I'm putting the heat, based on how I'm getting it to move. Say again?
Extra metal is tilting out the sides, or is it just smudging together in the sides?
I don't know.
I see, okay. It just works, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm one of those guys that I don't always fully understand exactly what's happening. I just know whether it works or not. You know, the more I try to use math and try to engineer things, the more I screw it up. All right, I'm going to try not to bring this edge down out this way or shorten the sides anymore on this area. I'm going to try to even it up. At home, sometimes what I will do is I'll get to a point where I'm focused on the flat bottom center, getting that to a certain size or shape, and I start to ignore the sides. And if one side's higher than the other, I don't worry about it. When it's cold, I take my dividers in, find the low spot, scrape around it, put a mark on it, and use a Beverly shear to trim it. So the smaller pans I can normally get pretty close without having to worry about that. And I also want to watch that I don't get too much heat up on the side. If I do, just cool it off a little bit, because if you get too much heat on this side, it'll collapse. I do have a spot I don't like. Where is it? I saw it a minute ago. It looks like I have kind of a straight flat spot here, but I don't have enough heat there. Now it starts to get confusing for me because I put it in the fire this way and I turn it over and I have to remember I have to switch sides visually. Go backwards, etc. Yeah.
Have you ever thought of putting like a round bar underneath as a stop so that when you drove it would stop everything your height?
No, I haven't tried that. I do have I had years ago when I first started doing this, a machine shop take a 9-inch bar, face it off on one side and dish it on the other. And it comes back to having a million tools for specific size pans. And I just started going free form on them.
So, in a gas forge, how do you keep heating up the sides? Are you quenching it?
Quench it. I also, if I'm going to do a lot of them, yeah, a lot of times I just quench the side. Stop for a second. I have an old aluminum fuel tank that somebody got and cut it in half for me. So I have a very large quench tub that's about this tall, and it's real easy to just reach in and cool the edges off like this here. This is not done. I have a few minutes. I want you to see kind of the development that's going on here. You see how this needs to be worked a little bit more. I'm going to be working towards this area. You see how I don't want to work here anymore. I don't want that any lower. I could really concentrate and get those corners really sharp if I wanted to, but it's not really necessary. So do you see the differences here that I'm working in? You can see it from the inside as well. My understanding is sometimes I'm upsetting the material, sometimes I'm stretching it. I don't worry about which is where.
Okay, it just works.
It works. What I'm going to focus on is trying to get these sides relatively even, get this relatively flat inside. That's my goal at this point. So I'm going to focus my heat in this area, get this radius out, try to get it really close to the same size walls all the way around. And you can understand, you're looking at it here, do I heat it here? No, I heat it here. And it's kind of a mind game for me.
Heat it up.
Yes, please. I hate to admit it, but this is where coal would be an advantage for me over propane. So what I did do is when I was starting to answer your question and forgot, I built a vertical propane forge. So when I'm working on the vertical forge, the edges are up and they're not getting as hot.
It's like a burner for heating up your turkey cooked oil, your oil.
I'm sorry? I can't hear you, Dan. When I was in Western New York, I rented shop space for a few years from another smith that was active in the SCA, Society for Creative Anachronisms, and I went to a couple of their events, and a guy that made armor was looking at a couple of my frying pans, and we got to talking about our different methods of shaping the metal. And one of the things that he said that was one of the most useful tools he had was good earplugs. Yeah, there's something about the sheet metal work, and when you're banging on some of these things, the different noises. So at this point, like I said earlier, I'm working on trying to get a more consistent radius, the side walls in a very similar shape. Can you see that corner starting to develop even more as I work it? The other thing that you have to watch in working these is when to stop, because that bottom will start doing what I call the old oil pan routine. If you work it too much, hit it too hard in the bottom, you thin it out, and then it pushes this way, and you flip it over and you push it back, and it becomes an endless battle. I'm going to stop. Again, I could fuss and fuss and fuss on this. I don't think you came here to watch me fuss. You came here to get ideas and concepts. This is going to be hot, so eventually I'm going to work the sides a little bit more. I'll do that cold. I want you to see the kind of shapes that I'm getting out of this. The sides on this are not as cupped and curved as the swedge I use at home. Some people like a cup side. Some people like a flat side. So for this size pan, it would be no big deal to use the vise and a light hammer and I'll do that, and we'll flatten the sides. I'm still just touching the surface in research on frying pans for the 18th century. What I do know is frying pans, sheet metal frying pans were being made. The guys at Williamsburg, a couple of them have books that were able to show me 1750s, there was I think it was Swedish industrialist that was spying on industries in England and Wales, and he has a drawing, he made a drawing of a hand-operated press that looks like a cone, like part of a cone that was pressing pans. I have a reference to, from a newspaper that I need to find it again, a friend sent it to me, that in the early 18th century, somebody was bemoaning the fact in one of the newspapers that there were only 2 pan makers left in England. That's all it says, doesn't say anything else about it. And I have seen some older pieces that I know that were 19th century that did have the cup sides. You're not going to get the cup sides if you're making them in a press. You can also sharpen up this corner when you're doing this. Do you see the difference here? You can see the marks. I'm going to go all the way around so that it's more consistent, and then we'll attach the handle to it. There's a lot of, there's more 19th century frying pans. I've seen more 19th century frying pans than I have 18th century. Is Matt around? Is Matt around? I'm going to clean the edge of this off, punch it, and hope somebody will knock a couple holes in it for me really quickly. Here, come put your finger right here. sometimes it's easier to make the radius tighter than you need and then take it out. Okay, center punch there. Around 3/16 diameter, please. I normally drill the holes, both of these first, and I'm going to put a mark and have them drill one hole in the pan, put one rivet in, drill the second hole, and that way you have a perfect lineup. I'm going to pick a location for the handle. That didn't work. You see those two are easy to find. There's the other one.
Okay.
All right. Find my other rivet. There it is.
Jim, would you talk about the animals you had pictures
Sure.
of last night?
While he's doing that, it's a good time to talk. The anvils that I have made and sell are entirely cast tool steel H13. It's an air hardening steel. They're through hardened, which means each end of it's just as hard, the bottom, top, it's all hard, so you could actually forge on any part of the anvil. The 18th century style anvil that I have done, I studied a bunch of them, Postman's book, a couple of other places, originals. The 18th century London pattern is a blockier anvil. The earlier anvils seem to be blockier stump, and this is really a 19th century design taken off the early London pattern. Most people, and I use the term colonial pattern on my anvils because that's what most people identify with it. Technically, it's an early London pattern. You start putting the horn on one end, and then eventually you see them start to stretch out. So it's a blockier anvil, and actually they're really great to work on with that mass in the center. What I don't like about these London patterns is getting out on the back side. They make more noise, they bounce a little bit more. They're not, to me, they're really designed more with horseshoers in mind than they are forging, sort of heavier forging work. That's my theory, and they just became popular, and it also backs up the historical idea that a lot of blacksmiths did shoe horses, so it's more versatile. Reality of the matter is you don't need a whole lot of surface to do your forging. One of my early instructor, as I was trying to develop or come up with a period correct anvil for my demonstration unit, he says, really, you don't need much more than this. An early style stump anvil, you look at more primitive stuff, you start finding basically blocks of steel or iron in many cases. Many cases they didn't even have steel on them. Thanks. We'll see how close I estimated this one hole. That's about where I wanted it. Just put it down anywhere. I'm going to adjust it. Just made me think of what one of you were supposed to remind me about is riveting frying pans and utensils. I normally put the head, the commercially made head, on the outside. I normally make the rivet as short as possible, but I make the internal part that I peen over as flat and as thin as possible because I want people to really use these things, which means they're going to be cooking in them, serving with them or whatever. Then they have to clean, get in and scrub or whatever. So I want that rivet as tight as possible with the least edge possible for them to get caught on, whether it be their hands or their washcloth or scrubbing, whatever. So I make those as thin as possible. And I've seen a few people decide to make some frying pans themselves, and they put the dome round head on the inside of the pan and leave it stick. And I figured women are going to be complaining to you about that. So.
Is that why you're using the really big heavy hammer to set the rivet?
Yeah.
And how does the length of the rivet increase by that?
About that much?
About that?
Yeah. Yeah, Mike.
How do you clean and finish your pans?
Good question. If I have the time, I prefer to pickle them with vinegar. It really gets all the scale out and leaves a really nice finish. If I don't have time, I attack it with a wire wheel. And then I warm them up, sometimes at the fire, whatever, and I use spray cooking oil and give them a light coat of oil so that they don't rust. And I tell the customer, thank you, that they need to, wash it and actually treat it, for those that get into these, to treat it the same as they would cast iron. It's actually easier to take care of than cast iron. It's not as porous, so you don't have to worry as much about your having it seasoned. And here's the test. It's close. Yeah. It's really close. There. I don't use peanut oil just because I don't feel like looking for it and buying it. I would recommend pickling that one and just fill it up with vinegar. You don't have to worry about the outside. It's the inside. Cheap vinegar from the grocery store works great for those.
How long does that take?
At least overnight. The other nice thing about working with vinegar in that situation is you could leave it for a week and it's not going to destroy it. You don't have to worry about that. I will. That makes me think of another story, a family story. My mother's father was an alcoholic. He was a mason, and he never missed a day of work. But apparently he would come in 3 sheets to the wind, and one night, I don't know if he said something to my grandmother or what it was, but she nailed him with a frying pan. Left a knot on his head, and he goes to work next day bragging about what the little old lady did to him, showing everybody the knot on his head. So I don't know how much time we have here. Did I answer your question about the anvils?
What about the ones that have the little horn that sticks out the side of the anvil? What's the screw with those?
Coach makers and chain makers had custom anvils. And, I don't know about the coach maker's anvil that has a little horn sticking out. It's below. I'm not sure what they were doing with it. Chain makers, obviously, I can understand. There's a horn sticking out this way, and I think it's more rounded. Have you seen them?
Yeah, a lot of times they'll just drill a hole through the anvil and have basically a bar stick.
Okay. Which is the other advantage.
Coachmaker's anvil, and I have
I don't know what they were making on them. In the 19th and 20th century, there are sawyer's anvils that are big, big blocks. And what they were doing is hammering on big, big saws for sawmills, circular saws. Some way or another, if they get out of shape or something like that, they could pound on them and move the metal to get them back flat.
They would actually tune them so that when they came up to the right RPM, cutting the right material, it would be straight and would cut straight.
Right.
How they knew that, I have no idea.
Sure.
It's an art.
Yeah.
Tell if you ain't got a saw blade, we used to have a big sawmill.
Yeah.
That blade would almost look like a dish rack, and as soon as you got up to 750,
Wow.
staring you right there in the face.
Huh.
But up until
Yeah. The Continental anvils that I have made, I made them specifically I had the patterns made specifically to my likings. In fact, I still have a couple cheap Turkish imports that I got from Tom Clark years ago, and I wish I'd have bought a boatload of them. They were really cheap, and they're great student anvils. And what I really like on the Continental style is the hardy hole over here. I didn't like it initially until I got used to it. But with that hardy hole over on my left side, I don't have to worry about popping that hardy out immediately. I get really paranoid seeing anybody working an anvil near their hardy and not using it. I guess Francis used to yell at people, and I would too. That's one of my paranoid things. But I really like having the hardy hole over here and a Pritchell hole over here. I had a Euro anvil for a number of years. It was a little bit on the soft side, and I tweaked that design to my design for the big one. And the feet are cut out underneath the hardy hole and the Pritchell hole. With those cheap imports, I found that when I would drive a punch through, it would bind up underneath that foot. And since I've took the leap and went into metal stands, I've got holes in the stands, the tripods, and I think I have a video and some pictures up online of some of the cannon bolts I do. They're longer than if I had an anvil stand without the hole. And I guess maybe that's one of the reasons why the London pattern kind of stretches out back here, is if this block ended here, we could drive something down to the floor from here. And maybe that's one of the reasons why they stretched these out. I don't know.
Like on the Fontaine, rat hole anvils.
Yeah.
He has that step on there. And I love the step, but at what point do you think is that modern or is that an old?
The step actually comes about from
On the side.
the extension. Yeah, I have the extension too, and I don't know when they started putting those on. I think that old video or pictures of like some of the last German smiths making anvils by hand in maybe the 30s, they're putting them on then. So I don't know when that shelf comes on, and I love it too, and that's why I put them on mine.
I love it because you can hit in between.
Yeah.
Straight.
Sure. So I just decided to take the leap and have the anvils made for my likings, and I have the patterns available, and others are buying them. I normally do them to order. I normally don't keep any in stock because it's a lot of money for me to tie up to stare at looking on the shelf. My business is making this stuff. It's not anvils, So they're not terribly cheap, but they're a pretty good tool. You can ding them like any other anvil. The only one might be Ruffling House, and I don't know. I worry about them chipping. When I sell an anvil to somebody, the edges are actually sharper than what I want, but with the material that I've had these made out of, you can grind them to whatever desire you want. You're not going to affect the heat treat on them. That's the other beauty of the H13. No, go ahead. No.
I was going to ask, where do you grind your round edges on it in relation to like the shelf and everything else?
It's normally in this area, close to the shelf extension. And it's like the small one that I have in the shop, I need to go and dress it down a little bit more. I've left it a little bit too sharp. The big one too. If you have too sharp of edges, like I do those corners, the shoulders, it'll bite right through it, almost act like a cutter. So I haven't gotten real worried about having this radius here and that radius there, and you know, I just worry about the edges rolling over if I don't. I've had one customer, and I'm not sure how long I've been doing it now, at least 8 years I've been having anvils made for me, and I've had one customer tell me that he chipped the edge of one a little bit because he didn't round it off enough, and he had an errant blow, and he wasn't complaining to me about it. He said he was frustrated he did it. So I can't make a perfect tool for everybody. I don't expect to. You know, if you want more information about them, I have them up on the website. I didn't come here to sell tools. If I'd have driven here, I would have sold tools. And one of the I have never flown to an event, so this was exciting. It was a big adventure for me, and I wasn't sure what to bring, and tried to bring the least amount. Normally, I bring a lot of stuff for you guys to look at and handle, but I guess that's why we do the slideshow too. Thanks for having me. I think we're going to wrap this up here. I'm supposed to be done at 1:45.
What was the diameter of the fry pan before you started?
I started with 8 inches. Anybody have a scale on them? I don't know how it ended up. It's probably about 7.
8 inches.
Yeah, this was an 8-inch disc.
Well, I've got about a 360-pound anvil.
Uh-huh.
And it was made with hardy